Hi, I'm Jan Wegener and welcome back to the Early Bird Photo News. A few days ago I was taking portraits of pale-headed rosellas in my backyard when I noticed something strange. All the images I was taking somehow looked off and a bit blurry. So I started to investigate, took the camera off my lens, took the color converter off my lens, made sure all the lenses are cleaned the contacts on the camera, put the camera and the teleconverter back onto my lens, and the problem still persisted. All the shots I was taking were still blurry. So I really started to think then, what the heck is going on here? It was a pretty mild morning, so I didn't think heat haze would be a problem, and everything else that I could see was also fine. So was my gear broken? And then I remembered something that I said in a video last year that had never actually happened to me, but I heard it happen to other people before. Heat haze inside your lens hood. So I still didn't think that was the reason, but I went ahead, took the lens hood off, and to my shock, all the images were suddenly razor sharp with a great detail. That day wasn't particularly hot, just nice and pleasant to be outside, but the morning sun had started to shine onto my lens hood and my camera. And apparently that was enough to cause heat haze build up just within my lens hood. And this also made me wonder, has this happened to me before without me realizing, and I got bad photos simply because there was heat haze stuck inside my lens hood? With smaller lens hoods like this one from the 200 to 800, it's probably not as pronounced this issue, even though I think knowing this now, the black lens hood design is not ideal. But with bigger lenses in particular, this seems to be an issue that can be quite prevalent and something that I will be a lot more aware of in the field. Has anything like this actually ever happened to you? I would love to hear that in the comments, because I think this is a very underrated problem that can happen many more times than we think and can be a real killer for image quality. You're always interested to see what happens to all the photos that I take out there in the field as well, and if I sell them. And while that's not a main focus of mine, it's definitely something that I do as well. And a few weeks ago I showed you a photo of a rock parrot that I edited as a vertical to be put on a cover for a magazine. And now that magazine has finally launched, so I'm able to share now the photo and the final cover with you guys as well. And I think it looks pretty good. Would you agree? And if you need help to set up your cameras to perfection or want an editing workflow that will allow you to transform all your RAW files, even the most difficult to edit ones, with ease, check out my Canon, Nikon and Sony setup guides and my Lightroom and Photoshop masterclasses down there in the description. My setup guides will help you to transform your camera into a real powerhouse and get your autofocus locked onto target so you can get razor sharp RAW files in the field every single time. And in my masterclasses, I teach you step by step all the important tools and techniques you need to learn to be able to turn those RAW files from the field into stunning final images that you can share with the world. But don't just take my word for it. Check out the amazing reviews I receive on a daily basis from many happy photographers who I've helped to set up their cameras and also improve their editing skills dramatically. So if you want to supercharge your camera and get the best possible results from your RAW files when editing, make sure to check out my setup guides and masterclasses down there in the description. I know they will help you a lot. I've stayed away from talking about the upcoming R6 Mark III for a little while because there was so much conflicting information about the camera out there and I got burned a couple of times. So I wanted to take a little break and only share something again when I know it would likely going to be happening. And it seems like we finally got the dates, specs and price for that camera. Canon Rumors seems to be fairly confident that the camera will come in November. What I was seemingly bang on about were the specs of the R6 Mark III that I revealed a few weeks ago. And now Canon Rumors also shares basically the same specs. We're very likely going to get the same sensor that we also can find in the Canon C50, which has 34.2 megapixels for photography. So definitely a nice range of having enough megapixels without going too much and also keeping the price probably down, while also separating the camera enough from the R5 Mark II. We'll also likely get 40 frames per second with the electronic shutter. We get pre-capture, which is fully working unlike on the R6 Mark II. And then we will likely also get OpenGate video recording, maybe even 6K video and hopefully 4K 120 frames per second in video as well, which is something that's currently missing for the R6 Mark II. On top of that, of course, the camera will also have IBIS and seemingly has the same or very similar autofocusing system that we can also find in the R5 Mark II. That leaves three big question marks for me with that camera. What is the buffer size going to be? Because I'm afraid it's still going to be relatively small, especially when the camera comes with two SD card slots. At this stage, we don't know, but that's another one of the big question marks. Hopefully the camera will have one CF Express Type B and one SD card slot, but I think it will likely have 2 SD card slots, and then a relatively small buffer could become a quite big issue, like it's currently on the R6 Mark II as well, where you can shoot at 40 frames per second, but then you basically hit the buffer within under 2 seconds of shooting, which often case is not enough. And lastly, the kind of big elephant in the room is the sensor. It's basically now a given that the camera will not have a stacked sensor and will have the same or similar sensor to what we see in the C50, which is nice because it has amazing image quality and dynamic range, but at the same time it has a readout speed of around 14 milliseconds from what I could gather on the internet when reading about the C50. So that means image wobbles on rolling shutters are likely not going to be much improved to the current R6 Mark II, which also has a readout speed of about 14 milliseconds. Since we've seen with other cameras that having a faster stacked sensor can degrade image quality, I'm sort of torn on the results here. I love having a camera that will likely also be fantastic in low light, but at the same time it would have been nice to have a camera that has a slightly faster readout speed. So hopefully there is some surprise there when Canon actually announces the camera, but for now it seems like that rolling shutter and image wobbles will kind of remain the same, which is a little bit of a bummer. Would you agree? Have you been bothered with the image wobbles and the rolling shutter on the R6 Mark II, or you think it's fine? All in all, I must say this sounds like a very interesting camera, especially for video work, because it will also have open gate recording, which makes it easier to record horizontal and vertical video. This is always a huge problem for me in the field, for instance, because usually I film horizontally because most of my content goes on YouTube. But if I want to post a reel on Instagram or TikTok, for instance, it's very hard to fit that horizontal footage into the 9:16 ratio. So having a little bit more real estate in the original video to work with will be great for those purposes. When it comes to the price, it seems like the R6 Mark III will remain quite competitive. One price that has been revealed by Canon Rumors seems to be €2,899, which would suggest that the camera may actually stay under that $3,000 US mark, which would be quite nice to see. Now it might slip above it, but if Canon could keep it below $3,000 with all these amazing specs, I think this would be quite a good selling camera. Canon Rumors also seems to be very confident that Canon will release 4 more lenses this year. One lens I know will happen is a 45mm f1.2 lens, but the other 3 are kind of unknown. Canon Rumors is speculating here and saying that they think that one of the lenses is the long rumored 300 to 600 lens with an f4 to f5.6 aperture, but I still haven't heard anything from my sources about that lens, so it might come, but I'm not 100% convinced that it will actually be also announced in November like Canon Rumors seems to suggest. So for that lens, we still have to wait and see, but it's definitely something I would love to try in the field, because as we've seen in my last video about the 100 to 500 and the 200 to 800, there's definitely room for a slightly higher end, faster zoom in the Canon lineup. Would you agree? And there's actually also now what seems to be the first photo of the R6 Mark III. It's very low res and you can't really see anything, but it seems like the camera is definitely out there in the wild. Another camera we've been seemingly waiting for forever is the Sony a7 IV, but it seems like there's some traction happening here, with rumors circling around that a camera will be announced either mid or late November, which would be fantastic. And it's also interesting to see Canon and Sony going head to head with 2 cameras basically in the identical category, and now they will likely also have a very similar megapixel count, with the Canon coming in at 34 megapixels and the Sony very likely coming in at 33 megapixels. The biggest mystery here still remains whether Sony will come with a partially stacked or stacked sensor or also keep it non-stacked. Considering that Canon is non-stacked and Nikon with their Z6 III is partially stacked, I think Sony will likely also stay with a non-stick sensor. However, this would give them a big chance to also blow past Canon and Nikon and put in a fully stacked sensor, which would definitely set that a7 IV apart. Now, if that's going to happen, I'm not so sure, but it's definitely going to be interesting times for us camera nerds. There's also a few photos of the body around, which seem to suggest that it will have a very similar shape and design to the Sony a7R V. Which of the 2 cameras are you actually the most interested in? The R6 Mark III, the Sony a7 IV, or something completely different? Let me know in those comments. Speaking of long wait times, Nikon has also announced that they had many more orders than they expected, kind of like with every camera release these days, so there might be longer delays when it comes to receiving your Nikon ZR cameras. Now, waiting is never fun, but it seems like this camera has definitely found a lot of people that like it in the filming community, offering fantastic specs with red codecs at a very reasonable price of under $3,000 US. I haven't used the Nikon ZR myself yet, but would you be interested in me making a video about it, or are you mainly interested in photography focused cameras? Let me also know in the comments. And lastly, I wanted to share a few sales figures from Japan with you. And what stands out to me here is always how the low end of the market is dominating the sales. And it's also one of the reasons why Sony and Canon in particular have put out so many different variations of fairly cheaply priced cameras. On this channel in particular, we often like to talk about the very expensive and high-end gear, but it's also interesting to see that that only makes up a small portion of the market, and that the cameras that are dominating are cameras like the ZV-E10 or the Canon R50. Interestingly, I think if you're photographing people or do a lot of content or filming, it's much easier to get away with a cheaper camera that doesn't have as many features as compared to nature and in particular bird photography. I feel like for cameras and autofocusing systems in particular, tracking small birds is one of the hardest tasks. And here the difference between a lower end camera and like an R1 or an A1 II is much more substantial than if you try to photograph people, for instance. And this is also why I often talk about the higher gear, because it's basically what's needed to take the images of very small creatures out there in nature. And that wraps up today's early bird photo news. Please share all your thoughts with me about the video down there in the comments. Give me a thumbs up for the video, check out my setup guides, my channel membership and my masterclasses. And of course, hit that subscribe button so we can grow our community, and I'll see you in another video very soon. Bye!